Tonight, scientists are seeing lower water levels in the Great Lakes, a change from these images of homes disappearing into the water after we saw high levels just a couple of years ago.
From above, the Great Lake looked perfectly still. But underneath sits a world that has trapped ships, aircraft, and thousands of years of history nobody remembers. And what scientists are uncovering now is strange enough that it is rewriting what we thought we understood about the greatest lakes in North America. Stay with us, because it gets less believable as it goes. The shoreline that should not be moving. Let's start with what's visible from the shore, which is the water level itself. Lake Michigan-Huron rose 6 feet across the 7 years from January 2013 to the summer of 2020. And for a lake covering 45,000 square miles, that puts the volume into trillions of gallons. All of it arrived across a span of months. And boat docks high and dry for years ended up underwater. Then almost suddenly the whole thing went into reverse. And within a few years, the same shoreline that had swallowed those docks was leaving boat ramps stranded in dry sand. But here's what unsettles the hydrologist. None of this behaves like a slow climate trend over a century. It comes in short, violent swings, record low to record high and down again. And the models built to see it coming have been outrun by the lakes every time. Once something this size moves faster than the maths can follow, the word lake stops fitting. What you have is a system nobody controls. So the shoreline is clearly telling us something, and the only question left is, what? The water that never comes back. To understand why that is important, you firstly have to know how easily this whole thing breaks. Every drop in all 5 lakes heads the same way, northeast, down the St. Lawrence, out to the Atlantic. 94,000 square miles of it, draining through one exit. One way in, one way out, almost nothing coming back. But here's the fact that stops people cold. Each year, rain and snowmelt only put back less than 1% of the water in the Great Lakes. The rest is meltwater the glaciers left when they retreated over 10,000 years ago. Geologists call it fossil water. So, in the biggest freshwater system on the planet, 99% of the water is non-renewable. Handed over once, and that was it. Waste it, poison it, or drain it. And no refill arrives in spring. That is the emergency running quietly behind the postcard. And there is a number that makes it far worse because it tells you how many people drink from a supply that cannot be refilled. America's biggest water supply. This is America's biggest water supply, and roughly 40 million people drink from it. 8 US states, 2 Canadian provinces, dozens of major cities including Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Toronto, and Milwaukee. That outnumbers the entire population of Canada, each of them filling a daily glass from a supply disappearing into a warming atmosphere faster than at any point on record. The mechanism is simple. Warmer air leaves less winter ice. Thinner ice leaves more bare water under the sun, and bare water lifts off into the atmosphere. Some recent winters have finished with ice cover below 10%, when the long-term average sits closer to 50%. The lakes, in other words, are steadily emptying themselves upward into the air. So, while there is still time, the question is what all that water is covering up. And the drying out is only the entrance to it. But why exactly do the divers who work down there call that floor a museum, where nothing ages and nothing decays? The underwater Stonehenge. In 2007, Mark Hawley, an underwater archaeologist, was running sonar across Grand Traverse Bay in Lake Michigan, hunting shipwrecks, when the readout showed him something 40 feet down that was not a wreck. Stones in a whole run, spaced wrong for anything a current or a glacier leaves behind. Somebody had set them in a line. The one that mattered was the size of a car and cut into its face. Faint but there, was a shape with a long curving trunk and a heavy humped back. Anybody who has seen a mastodon would know it, and mastodons have been gone from North America some 10,000 years. Follow that through, and the implication is uncomfortable. To make that carving, a person had to be standing on ground that now lies 40 feet underwater, at a point in history when mastodons and mammoths were still walking around on it. And the geology does not rule it out. The stones are put at roughly 9,000 years old, 4,000 years before Stonehenge was raised, when the last ice had gone, and Grand Traverse Bay did not yet exist. That ground was dry. What nobody can do is settle it, and the reason is specific. Carbon dating needs organic material, bone or charcoal or wood. It cannot read a cut in rock. You can date what lies beside a carving, never the carving itself, which is how a stone like this sits in plain view for years, with nothing proved either way. A minority of geologists still argue the whole thing is glacial, since ice drags boulders into rows. Others point to possible sunrise alignments. And John O'Shea at the University of Michigan notes it resembles a 9,000-year-old drive lane he has worked on in Lake Huron, built to funnel migrating caribou toward hunters. Hawley himself has never said he is certain. He has also never found a way to dismiss it, so the stone stays where it is, in the dark, with nobody willing to deliver a verdict on it. Whatever these lakes are keeping from us, that row of stones is the first piece of it with an outline you can actually look at. The lake that keeps its dead. Here is why the bottom preserves things so perfectly. Temperature. Superior runs 1,200 feet down at its lowest point. That far below the surface, the water sits barely above freezing every day of the year, and it never warms up. Add almost no oxygen and no light at all, and bacteria cannot live there. And without bacteria, nothing rots. There is a reason that cold never lifts. Fresh water is heaviest at about 4 degrees Celsius, so the coldest water in the lake sinks and settles on the bottom, regardless of what the season is doing at the surface. Summer simply never reaches it. Sailors have a grim old saying, "Superior never gives up her dead." It is not poetry, it is chemistry. In a warmer lake, tissue breaks down, gas builds up inside the body, and it floats back to the surface. Superior is too cold for any of that to start. Whatever goes down, stays down. Ships that went down 150 years ago sit on the floor with the paint still on the hull. So if nothing ever comes up, how many things are down there? 6,000 ships. The best estimate is staggering. Somewhere around 6,000 ships have sunk in the Great Lakes since records began. Some historians put the total, counting the undocumented and the unfound, closer to 25 or even 30,000. And with them went an estimated 30,000 human lives. 30,000 people in lakes hundreds of miles from any ocean. One name comes up more than any other, the Edmund Fitzgerald. She was 729 feet long, among the biggest vessels working those waters. And on the 10th of November, 1975, she went into a storm on Superior and came off the radar. Nobody on board sent a distress call. All 29 men aboard were lost. The wreck was found days later, broken in two, 530 feet down. There is also a reason these lakes break ships when open ocean would not. Sea waves are long and widely spaced, so a hull rides over them. Waves here are shorter, steeper, and closer together, which can leave a long ore freighter supported at both ends with nothing under the middle or the reverse. That is the loading that snaps a ship in two. And the storms that do it have a nickname up there, the Witch of November. That is how routine catastrophe is on these lakes. The killer season has a name, like a returning guest. The triangle nobody talks about. Everyone has heard of one triangle in the Atlantic. Almost nobody has heard of the one in Lake Michigan. Through the last century, enough went missing in the northern half of that lake that pilots and sailors gave the area a nickname. In 1937, the captain of a freighter called the O.M. McFarland stepped into his own cabin and was never seen again. The door, when it was opened, had been locked from inside. In 1950, Northwest Airlines Flight 2501 went down over the lake with 58 people aboard. It was the deadliest U.S. commercial air disaster of its time. Divers have hunted the main wreckage for decades. Engine parts have come up, along with debris and passengers' belongings. But the fuselage, where the answers would be, has never been found. 58 passengers and crew, an aircraft as big as a building, and a lake that shut over the top of all of it. How does something that large stay hidden for 75 years in water we have mapped with sonar? That is not folklore, that is an open case. And while we were failing to find a missing aircraft, the same sonar found something nobody was looking for. The lost world under Lake Huron. Now stop, because this is the discovery you were promised. Deep under Lake Huron, researchers found hunting structures built by people 9,000 years ago, still perfectly preserved. Long rows of stones, hunting blinds, even stone tool fragments, revealing that people once lived here when this was dry land. These were not random rocks. They were laid out to steer animals toward hunters waiting for them, and they are still sitting exactly where those hunters put them. Then the glaciers melted, the water climbed, and a whole landscape went under and stayed there for thousands of years. Divers can now stand where Ice Age hunters once waited for migrating caribou. What is under the Great Lakes is more than history. It is a lost world, and we have only just started finding it. The day the tap turned toxic. August 2014. People across Toledo, Ohio woke up to an alert on their phones. The instructions were unusual. Leave the tap alone. Do not try to boil it safe, because heating it makes the problem worse. And keep it off your skin. For nearly 500,000 people, the tap had become poison overnight, and nobody could say how long it would last. The instruction not to boil is the part that catches people out, because boiling is what you do with unsafe water. Microcystin does not behave like a germ. Heat does not break it down, so boiling only removes water as steam and leaves the toxin behind in a stronger concentration than you started with. What had caused it was algae, a blue-green bloom in the western end of Lake Erie, spread so wide that satellites picked it up from orbit. The color was a thick, glowing green, and the whole thing was producing microcystin, a toxin that goes after the liver. That put 400,000 people in a major American city into queues for bottled water, because the biggest freshwater system on the continent had stopped being safe to drink. And here is the crime part. This was not an accident of nature. We fed it, deliberately every spring for decades. The poison we poured in. Those blooms are built almost entirely out of one thing: phosphorus, fertilizer runoff. Every spring, rain washes off the farm fields and gardens all around Lake Erie and carries the nutrients downhill into the water. Fertilizer then does to algae exactly what it was made to do for corn. It makes it grow out of control. In a bad season, an Erie bloom can spread past 700 square miles, bigger than the city of Houston, on the shallowest and warmest of the 5 lakes, the one with the most people around it. And it is happening more often because the same warm water that is drying the lakes out is also the ideal temperature for growing the toxin. Put plainly, we tip poison into the water we drink, then act shocked when it comes back poisoned. Which brings us to the invaders. This one did not come from a farm. It arrived from the other side of the world, in the belly of a ship, and it has already rewritten the entire food chain from the bottom up. The invaders that rewrote the food web. Zebra and quagga mussels are tiny, and they arrived here in the late 1980s on cargo ships out of the Caspian Sea. Nobody brought them deliberately. They came in ballast water, pumped into a lake that had never seen them. Within decades, they spread across the lake beds by the hundreds of trillions. Each one pumps water through itself and strips out the plankton, which is what the native fish eat. The result is water you can see through for yards. The numbers behind that are what make it serious. A single mussel filters roughly a liter a day, and there are enough of them in Lake Michigan to strain the entire lake, all of it, in a matter of weeks. Nothing that lives out in open water can compete with a filter running at that scale. And they do not simply remove the food, they move it. What used to feed fish swimming in the middle of the lake now ends up as waste on the lake floor, so the whole system has been tipped downward, away from open water and onto the bottom. Clear water sounds like good news, but it is the opposite. The bottom of the food chain has been stripped out. Everything above it is being rebuilt on new terms, and what is left suits toxic algae perfectly. Everything in the Great Lakes is connected, which is exactly why the next threat, the one you cannot see at all, worries scientists more than any of this. The chemicals nobody signed off on. Now for the threat you cannot see. For more than a century, industry used these lakes to dump whatever it did not want. Mercury, PCBs, dioxins, and now PFAs, the forever chemicals. All still here in the water, the mud, and the fish. In some areas, people are told to eat certain fish only a few times a year because of what is built up inside them. 40 million people rely on this water. Most of them have never read one of those warnings. There are records of what went in, and that is not the worrying part. The worry is the mud it settled into, because if water levels keep swinging and the storms keep getting harder, all of it gets stirred back up. The bodies that keep turning up. This is where the crime chapter gets genuinely dark, so let us be careful and stick to what is documented. Across roughly 20 years, in university towns across the upper Midwest, many of them on these lakes, dozens of young men have been pulled from local water. Most were students and most had been out drinking that night. In nearly every case, the recorded cause is accidental drowning, but 2 retired New York detectives kept seeing a pattern they could not let go of. The victims were demographically near identical. The circumstances rhymed. They also say the same rough spray paint kept showing up near several recovery sites. A smiley face. Police do not back the idea, and the FBI's position is accidental drowning, not murder. The families have never accepted that, and for them, nothing is settled. Either way, young men keep ending up in cold water across a whole region. And the 2 available answers, terrible luck, or the one nobody says out loud, are both hard to sit with. The lakes keep the dead, but lately they have been giving a few of them back, and the ones they return do not always come with answers. The sounds nobody can explain. Here we cross from crime into the genuinely unexplained. Families besides Superior and Michigan have described the same noise for generations. A deep groaning thud off the water on a calm day, with no storm, no boat, and nothing there to make it. It is loud enough to rattle windows, and it comes off open water where there is nothing to make it. Locally, the term is lake guns. The name was taken from other unexplained booms that people have been writing down for the last 200 years. The explanations offered are shifting ice, gas escaping the mud, or distant thunder bending across open water. Ask privately and researchers admit none of those covers every case. Water this large, this deep, and this cold, moving under pressures we barely measure, makes noises nobody has identified. What is a lake saying when it groans? What the sonar keeps finding. Better sonar goes down every year, and every year it maps things nobody expected. Huge sinkholes sit on the floor of Lake Huron, hundreds of feet across. The water coming out of them has almost no oxygen and a lot of sulfur, and the bacteria growing around the edges look nothing like anything else in a lake. They look like life from the deep ocean or from another planet. The best studied of them lies near Middle Island in Lake Huron, and what grows there is purple. Those mats are cyanobacteria, living without oxygen and running on sulfur instead, which is close to how life operated on this planet billions of years ago, before the air held any oxygen at all. NASA has studied these sinkholes as a model for what life might look like on other worlds, not as a metaphor, as an actual research site for extraterrestrial biology in a lake in Michigan. Out in open water in Michigan, the same equipment has found drowned shorelines, forests that died standing with the stumps still upright, and riverbeds cut when all of it was dry land. Spend enough hours in front of that screen, and everybody ends up saying a version of the same sentence. The moon has been mapped in more detail than the bottom of these lakes. The things scientists will not rule out. So ask the uncomfortable question directly. Is anything alive down there that we have not identified? The scientific answer is almost certainly not a monster, but it comes with a shrug. Sturgeon cruise the bottom of these lakes, living fossils past 7 feet, over 200 pounds, and a century old. One glimpsed from a boat would terrify anyone. Cold water zones remain barely surveyed, and the mussels proved a whole system can be rewritten by something nobody saw coming. No serious scientist is saying there is a creature down there, but ask whether every living thing in the coldest, blackest parts of a lake the size of a country has been identified and written down, and notice how carefully the answer gets phrased. But ask whether every living thing in the coldest, blackest parts of a lake the size of a country has actually been identified and written down, and notice how carefully the answer gets phrased. Fresh water that acts like a sea. They are called seiches. The whole lake tips one way then the other, and the level at a given beach can climb or fall several feet inside minutes. People have drowned on an otherwise calm day because the lake tilted. It has happened on a large scale. In 1954, a wall of water came ashore at Chicago, with no storm overhead, and swept fishermen off the Montrose Harbor Pier, killing several of them. The weather that day was fine. The lake had simply sloshed. They throw up rip currents and 20-foot waves, and Superior alone covers more ground than Austria. From the middle of it, there is no land in any direction. Sailors do not call them lakes. They call them inland seas. And that matters, because we keep treating them like ponds we understand, and they keep behaving like oceans. We do not. The glacier's fingerprint. To grasp why these lakes are so strange, go back to how they were born. 20,000 years ago, this region lay under a sheet of ice 2 miles thick. When that ice pulled back, it scraped out the basins underneath, with a force that is hard to imagine, then melted and filled the holes it had just dug. That is the fossil water. That is why it does not renew. The tap was shut off 10,000 years ago. These lakes are not really features of the modern world. They are the melted footprint of an ice age, still sitting full to the brim 10,000 years later. When you swim in Lake Michigan, you are swimming in a glacier that has been dead since before human civilization began, and the ice has not finished. 2 miles of it pressed the ground down for thousands of years, and with the weight gone, the land is still lifting a few millimeters a year, unevenly. The northern edges rise faster than the southern, so the whole basin is tilting, and the water has to move in response. Some shoreline change people blame on rainfall is the ground itself, still recovering from something that ended 10,000 years ago. The slow motion disappearance, which brings the whole story full circle, back to the shoreline and the missing water. The models say the swings get worse from here. Higher highs, lower lows, and a faster jump between them as a warming climate breaks the balance between what dries off and what flows in. And because so little is replaced each year, a long slide the wrong way does more than lower the level. It uncovers the poisoned mud, concentrates the chemicals, and shrinks the supply for 40 million people. The Great Lakes are hiding something, and the deepest secret might be the simplest one. Not a monster, not a conspiracy, just a finite, fragile, irreplaceable thing we have quietly assumed would always be there, and that is now measurably on the move. What is buried beneath the surface? So, what are the Great Lakes hiding? A whole 9,000-year-old landscape, hunting camps and all, a carving of an animal that has not walked this continent in 10,000 years, 30,000 of our own dead, kept in the cold and the dark, poison we mixed ourselves, chemicals that never leave, sinkholes NASA uses to picture life on other planets, and a body of ancient water that cannot be replaced, and that we are only now admitting we do not control. No scientist lies awake worrying about a monster. What worries them is duller and far worse. For a century, we have treated the biggest body of fresh water on Earth as a drain, a shipping route, and a tap that would never run dry. The surface is starting to show it. So next time you are standing on a beach up there looking out, keep in mind that you are looking at a lid and nothing else. The history is underneath it. So is the danger, and so is every answer. And we have barely started lifting it. So here is what we will leave you with. Out of everything down there, which one is going to keep you up tonight? Tell us in the comments.